Somewhere near the edge of known space, there is a small stone house. It sits alone on a quiet hill. Wind moves through tall grass. Nothing here looks unusual. But look closer, past the porch, past the old wooden chair, and you will see something that should not be possible. 3 feet away, a creature sleeps. This is not a pet. This is not some small animal. Its name causes fear across 1,000 worlds. Fleet captains change their flight paths when they hear it. Soldiers whisper it like a curse word. Some call it the HFY Reaper. Others just call it the Devourer. Reports say it has ended entire battles in minutes. Sources across the galaxy agree on one thing: no weapon has ever stopped it for long. And yet, right now, on this quiet hill, it sleeps like a newborn baby. Its huge head rests gently on the worn-out boots of one old man. He is not a king. He is not a soldier anymore. Not really. He is a tired, retired veteran named Samuel Voss. But the truth behind this strange, quiet picture will shock you. Today, we are going to uncover 3 things the galaxy still does not fully understand. First, why a creature feared by empires chose peace instead of war. Second, how one broken soldier did something entire armies could not do. Third, a secret from an old war that changed the fate of 2 species forever. A secret some say is still being hidden, even now. This is not just a story about a monster. This is a story about trust. It is a story about kindness in the middle of hate. And it is a story about one simple truth: the galaxy is only now starting to learn. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Dr. Ilan Vec did not believe the reports at first. Vec worked for the Galactic Concord Archive. His job was simple. He traveled from world to world, checking strange stories and separating truth from rumor. In 30 years of work, he had heard thousands of wild claims. Most of them were false. A few were exaggerated. Almost none of them were true exactly as told. But this story kept coming back to him, again and again, from different sources that had never met each other. Traders on the Outer Rim spoke of it in quiet voices. Soldiers from 3 different fleets mentioned the same name. Even old Scarn Dominion veterans, humanity's enemies from a war long past, repeated the same strange claim. They all said the same thing. On a quiet frontier world called Haven's Edge, a Vorath was living peacefully with a human. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand what a Vorath is. The Vorath are not simply dangerous animals. According to Concord military archives, a single adult Vorath can tear through starship hulls like paper. Its bite pressure was measured during one terrible test decades ago, at levels that shattered reinforced battle armor in a single strike. Its senses are sharper than almost any known species. It can track a heartbeat through solid rock. During the war years, the Vorath earned a name that still makes veterans go quiet in bars and mess halls across a dozen systems. They called it the HFY Reaper because wherever it walked, only ash remained behind. Military records, now partly declassified, describe entire outposts destroyed in under an hour. Some records suggest a single Reaper was responsible for the loss of 3 warships during one battle near the threshold line. Analysts at the time called it an unstoppable, unreasoning force of pure destruction. That is the reputation Dr. Vec carried with him when his shuttle landed on Haven's Edge. Haven's Edge was a quiet farming world. Only a few thousand people lived there, spread across small towns and wide fields. It reminded Vec of pictures he had seen of small towns back on Earth itself, places with names like Quiet Corners of Ohio, or small stone villages in Yorkshire, England. Simple people, simple lives. Not the kind of place you would expect to find the most feared predator in known space. Vec was met at the landing pad by a young woman named Callie Reyes, a local doctor who also helped run the town's small clinic. She did not smile much when she spoke about Samuel Voss. He keeps to himself, she told Vec, walking him toward a battered old transport truck. Has for almost 20 years. Comes into town maybe once a month. Buys food. Buys tools. Doesn't talk about the war. Doesn't talk about her. Either. Her Vec asked. The Vorath, Callie said. He calls her Junibug. Vec almost laughed. Junibug. A soft, gentle nickname for something with a reputation like a natural disaster. You've seen her, he asked. Callie nodded slowly. Once. From a distance. She's real. Doctor. She's really there. And she's massive. Bigger than any picture I've seen of a Vorath in the old records. And she hasn't hurt anyone. Not once. Not in 20 years. That single sentence sat heavy in Vec's mind, the entire drive out to Voss's farm. Not once in 20 years. A creature responsible, according to old records, for thousands of deaths during the war, had apparently lived peacefully beside human beings for 2 full decades without a single incident. Either the old stories about the Vorath were wrong, or something had changed her completely, or something about this particular human had changed her completely. The truck rolled up a long dirt road, past wide fields of golden grain swaying gently in the wind. At the top of a low hill, Vec saw the small stone house he had heard described so many times in second-hand reports. It looked ordinary, almost boring. A little garden grew beside the porch. A worn wooden chair sat near the front door. And lying beside that chair, taking up more space than seemed physically reasonable, was Junibug. Vec's breath caught in his throat. She was enormous, easily the size of a small transport vehicle, covered in dark, overlapping plates that shimmered faintly like oil on water. Her head alone was larger than a grown human torso. Long claws, each one longer than a human hand, rested loosely against the dirt. Even asleep, she radiated a kind of quiet, terrible power, the sort of stillness that makes every instinct in your body scream to run. But she was asleep, deeply asleep. Her huge chest rose and fell in slow, peaceful breaths. And her head, this weapon of a head that had reportedly ended starship crews, rested gently across the boots of an old man sitting quietly in that wooden chair. Samuel Voss looked exactly like what he was, an old soldier who had seen far too much and said far too little about it. His hair was gray and thin. His hands were rough and scarred. His eyes, though, were sharp and calm, the eyes of a man who had long ago stopped being afraid of most things in this galaxy. He watched the truck approach without moving from his chair, without disturbing the massive creature resting against his legs. "You're the Concord researcher," Voss said. Once Vec had climbed out of the truck. It was not really a question. Dr. Ilan Vec answered carefully, keeping his eyes on Junibug the entire time. "I'm here to understand what I'm looking at." Voss almost smiled. Almost. "Everybody wants to understand," he said quietly. "Nobody wants to listen long enough to actually understand anything." "I have time," Vec said. I have questions, if you'll answer them. Voss looked down at the sleeping creature, resting against his legs. Gently, carefully, he reached down and rested one scarred hand on the side of her massive head. She did not wake. She simply let out a long, low breath, almost like a sigh, and settled deeper into sleep. Ask your questions, Dr. Voss said finally. But I warn you, the real answer doesn't start here. It doesn't even start on this planet. Where does it start? Vec asked. Samuel Voss looked out toward the horizon, toward memories that clearly still weighed heavy on him, even after all these years. It starts 30 years ago, he said. During the war. On a world that doesn't exist anymore. 30 years earlier, Samuel Voss was not an old farmer with a quiet life. He was a 26-year-old Human Alliance sergeant, fighting in one of the ugliest conflicts in recorded galactic history, the Threshold War. The war had started, as most wars do, over resources and fear. The Skarn Dominion, powerful alien empire, believed humanity's rapid expansion into border systems threatened their territory. Humanity believed the Skarn were preparing an invasion. Neither side backed down. Within 2 years, the Threshold War had claimed millions of lives on both sides. By the 3rd year of the war, humanity was losing badly. The Skarn Dominion had a terrible advantage, the Voreth. According to captured research documents, the Skarn did not simply discover the Voreth in the wild. They created a weapons program around them. Skarn scientists took a naturally rare species from a distant jungle world and deliberately bred them for war, using pain, isolation, and controlled fear to make them more aggressive, more violent, more willing to kill on command. The result was a living weapon. A Voreth soldier could clear an entire human trench line in minutes. Standard weapons barely slowed them down. Morale among human troops collapsed wherever a Voreth was deployed. Command gave a simple, brutal order: find the Voreth breeding sites and destroy them completely. No survivors. No exceptions. Sergeant Samuel Voss led a small strike team assigned to one such mission, deep in Skarn-controlled territory, on a heavily forested world near the threshold line. What his team found there did not match the mission briefing. The breeding site had already been destroyed, not by human forces, but by an earlier Skarn military exercise gone wrong. A test weapon, something experimental, had wiped out most of the adult Voreth in the area, along with a dozen Skarn scientists and soldiers. The forest was silent, burned, empty, almost empty. Voss found her buried under fallen trees near the edge of a ruined lab compound. A juvenile Voreth, barely more than a large animal by adult standards, badly injured, alone, and terrified. Her mother, according to the scattered records his team recovered, had died defending the nesting site during the very same test that killed the researchers. Standard protocol was clear. Any surviving Voreth, regardless of age, was to be eliminated immediately. Command did not care about age. Command cared about the body count of a species responsible for thousands of human deaths. Voss's second-in-command, a young corporal named Danny Marsh, raised his rifle first. Standard protocol, Sarge Marsh said, voice shaking slightly. You know the orders. Voss stood very still, looking down at the injured creature in the wreckage. She was shaking. Her breathing was fast and shallow. One of her front legs was bent at a wrong angle, and her eyes, wide and dark, were fixed directly on Samuel Voss, the same way frightened child looks at an approaching stranger, unsure whether to expect kindness or death. Voss had seen that look before. He had seen it in the eyes of refugee children pulled from bombed-out human colonies. He had seen it in the eyes of his own soldiers after their first real battle. Fear does not care what species wears it. Sarge, Marsh said again, more urgently. The orders are clear. I know the orders, Voss said quietly. He lowered Marsh's rifle with one hand, gently but firmly. She's not a threat, Voss said. She's a wounded kid. Nothing more. She's a Vorath, Marsh said. Give her 6 months and she's a nightmare with teeth. Maybe, Voss admitted. Or maybe nobody's ever actually tried anything different with one of these things before. Maybe every single Vorath anyone's ever met has only known pain, fear, and cages. Maybe that's exactly why they turn out the way the Skarn wanted them to. Marsh stared at his sergeant like he'd lost his mind. Around them, the rest of the small strike team watched in tense, uncertain silence. Command will have your head for this, Marsh said quietly. Then they can have it, Voss said. But I'm not shooting a scared kid because of what she might become. I've spent 3 years watching this war turn good people into things they hate. I won't do the same thing to her before she's even had a chance. That single decision, made in the ashes of a destroyed research site on a forgotten world, would end up changing the course of the entire war. But at that moment, Samuel Voss had no idea what he had just started. He simply knelt down slowly, keeping his movements calm and steady, and extended one open hand toward the frightened, injured creature in front of him. She flinched violently at first. Every instinct in her small, damaged body screamed at her to attack or to flee. But she was too hurt to run, and something in the calm steadiness of this strange, upright creature's presence made her hesitate. Slowly, carefully, Voss reached into his medical kit and pulled out a simple field bandage. Easy, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Easy now. Nobody here's going to hurt you. It took nearly 20 minutes for her to allow him close enough to treat her injured leg. 20 minutes of quiet words, slow movements, and patient stillness, while 5 armed soldiers stood around them in stunned, uncertain silence. By the time Voss finished bandaging her leg, something had shifted. She was still frightened. She was still shaking. But she was no longer trying to pull away from him. Corporal Marsh lowered his rifle completely, staring at the strange scene in front of him. What now, Sarge? He asked quietly. Samuel Voss looked down at the small, wounded creature that would, in time, become known across the galaxy as one of the most feared beings alive. Now, Voss said, we figure out how to keep her alive. Keeping her alive turned out to be the easy part. Keeping her hidden was much harder. Voss's strike team made a choice that day that none of them ever fully explained in official reports. They quietly listed the juvenile Vorath as destroyed along with the breeding site and moved on with their mission, smuggling her along in a covered supply crate meant for medical equipment. It should not have worked. It barely did work, and only because Voss's small team trusted each other enough to keep a secret that could have ended all of their careers. Or worse. Over the following months, stationed at a quiet supply outpost near the edge of the war zone, Voss spent every spare hour with the young Vorath. He fed her. He treated her wounds. He sat beside her for hours at a time, simply talking quietly, the same way he might have spoken to a frightened new recruit far from home. He gave her a name, too, not a designation, not a serial number, a real name. Junebug, he told her one evening, as she rested her recovering leg against his boot. Back home, Junebugs are these little beetles that show up every summer. Clumsy little things. Bump into windows. Land on people's shoulders. Everybody thinks they're annoying, until one lands near a kid, and the kid just laughs instead of screaming. He looked down at her, this creature that terrified experienced soldiers on sight. "I think you're gonna surprise people the same way," he said quietly, "once they actually get to know you." Junebug grew fast. Within a year, she was already larger than most full-grown predators found on Earth. Within 2 years, she had reached a size that made even Voss's closest friends nervous around her. But she was never violent without cause. She never attacked without reason. And more than that, she showed something the old Scarn research files insisted was impossible for her species: genuine, deep loyalty. Word eventually spread. Of course, word always does. A visiting logistics officer noticed strange supply requests coming from Voss's outpost. Extra rations, unusual medical supplies, and grew suspicious enough to investigate quietly. What that officer found, and reported up the chain of command, set off alarm bells at the highest levels of the Human Alliance military. A Vorath, alive, bonded, somehow, to a human soldier. High Command's reaction was swift and predictable. If a Vorath could be controlled by a human handler, the strategic value was enormous. Reports suggest senior officers immediately began discussing the possibility of a bonded Vorath program, essentially attempting to recreate what Voss had done, but at a much larger scale, and for a much darker purpose: turning captured or bred Vorath into controlled weapons for humanity's own war effort. When Voss was informed of these plans during a tense meeting with visiting command staff, he refused outright. "She's not a weapon," he told them, according to second-hand accounts later shared by members of his unit. "She's not a tool you point at a target. I won't be part of turning her into exactly the thing the Scarn already tried to make her." Command was not interested in his objections. Orders came down for Junebug to be transferred immediately to a secure military research facility for evaluation. Samuel Voss made a second impossible choice that day. He refused the order, gathered a small pack of essential supplies, and disappeared into the war-torn frontier with Junebug, now a fully grown, immensely powerful Vorath, at his side. Military records officially labeled him a deserter. Wanted posters, of a sort, circulated through Alliance channels. Some called him a traitor. Others, quietly, among common soldiers who had heard whispers of the real story, began calling him something else entirely: the man who chose mercy over orders. For nearly a year, Voss and Junebug lived on the run, moving between remote outposts and abandoned settlements along the dangerous edges of contested space, hunted by both Alliance forces trying to reclaim their asset, and Scarn patrols who considered any wild Vorath a threat to be eliminated on sight. It was during this dangerous period that the true depth of their bond was finally tested. During a routine supply run through a war-damaged settlement, Voss walked directly into a Scarn ambush, a small patrol unit that had been quietly hunting rumors of a wild Vorath in the area. Outnumbered and cut off from Junebug, Voss found himself pinned down behind the ruins of a collapsed building, badly wounded, and completely out of options. According to the only surviving eyewitness account, a local settler hiding nearby, Junebug arrived within minutes, moving faster than anything that size should reasonably be able to move. She did not attack indiscriminately. She did not simply destroy everything in sight, the way old Skarn training records claimed a Vorath always would. Instead, witnesses described something far more controlled and far more terrifying to the soldiers caught in her path: a precise, focused defense of exactly one person, and nothing else. The Skarn patrol retreated within minutes, several of their number wounded, none killed outright. Junebug, according to the settler's account, immediately abandoned the fight the moment the threat to Voss had ended, rushing instead to his side, gently nudging his injured body with a care that seemed impossible for something so powerful. That single incident, quietly witnessed and later reported, planted the first seed of doubt in a story the galaxy thought it already understood completely. Maybe the Vorath were not simply mindless killing machines. Maybe, given the chance, they could choose something else entirely. The story of the beast and the deserter, as some frontier settlers began calling them, spread slowly at first, then faster, carried along supply routes and refugee camps throughout the war-torn border systems. Most people did not believe it. A Vorath that fought only in defense, that showed no interest in random destruction, that appeared to genuinely care for the safety of one human soldier, simply did not match everything both sides of the war had been told about the species. But a few people believed it enough to investigate further. One of those people was, according to later declassified Skarn Dominion records, a mid-level Skarn scientist named Threl Kavesh, one of the original researchers involved in the Vorath weapons program years earlier. Kavesh had grown increasingly disturbed by the brutal methods used to train young Vorath, methods he had personally witnessed and, according to his later testimony, had never fully supported. When rumors reached him of a Vorath living peacefully alongside a human, without any of the standard conditioning techniques, Kavesh made a dangerous decision of his own. He quietly reached out through neutral trade channels, seeking direct contact with Samuel Voss. Their eventual meeting, arranged carefully through several intermediaries to avoid detection by either military, produced information that would ultimately help bring the Threshold War to an end. Kavesh confirmed something that both militaries had suspected, but never openly admitted. The entire war had escalated based on flawed intelligence and mutual fear, deliberately amplified by extremist factions within the Skarn military, who benefited politically from continued conflict. The Vorath weapons program itself, Kavesh revealed, had been based on deeply flawed research that assumed aggression could only be created through pain and control, never realizing, or perhaps never caring, that an alternative existed. Voss and Junebug's simple, quiet existence had accidentally become living proof that the entire foundation of the Skarn's most feared weapons program was built on a lie. With Kavesh's help, and using evidence gathered from Voss's own experience, a small group of moderate voices within both the Human Alliance and the Skarn Dominion began pushing for renewed peace negotiations, using the Vorath situation as unexpected proof that both sides had been operating on dangerous, incomplete assumptions about their enemy. It took nearly another year of careful, difficult diplomacy. Voss himself was eventually granted a full pardon in exchange for providing testimony about his experience, testimony that directly contributed to new treaty terms limiting biological weapons research on both sides. The Threshold War officially ended 14 months later. Samuel Voss, now a minor and somewhat reluctant legend among certain military circles, chose not to stay in the spotlight. He requested a quiet discharge, took what savings and benefits he had earned, and disappeared to the far frontier world of Haven's Edge, along with Junebug, seeking nothing more than peace and distance from a war that had cost him nearly everything. For almost 20 years, that is exactly what he found. Word of his location occasionally leaked out, but most people dismissed it as exaggerated frontier folklore, the kind of tall tale told in trading posts and mining camps. A tame Voreth living quietly on a farm sounded, to most rational people, like nonsense. That changed roughly 6 months before Dr. Ilan Vek's arrival. A young trader passing through Haven's Edge captured a brief, blurry recording of Junebug resting peacefully near Voss's farmhouse. The recording, uploaded carelessly to a public frontier network, spread across galactic channels faster than anyone could control. Reaction was immediate and deeply divided. Some viewed it exactly as Dr. Vek eventually would, as an extraordinary, hopeful story worth understanding fully. Others reacted with fear and even hostility. Hardline factions within remaining Skarn military circles saw a terrifying possibility that humanity had somehow secretly succeeded where the original Skarn program failed, creating a fully controllable Vorath weapon disguised as a peaceful farm animal. Reports later suggested that one particular faction, a group of disgraced former Skarn military officers operating independently outside official Dominion control, began planning something far more dangerous than simple investigation. They intended to eliminate the threat entirely, by any means necessary, before it could be weaponized by anyone else. Dr. Vek, unaware of exactly how much danger was quietly converging on the quiet frontier world beneath him, continued his careful interviews with Samuel Voss, slowly piecing together decades of history that the wider galaxy had never fully understood. He had no idea that his research had arrived at Haven's Edge at almost exactly the same moment as a much darker kind of visitor. The attack came at night, 3 days after Dr. Vek's arrival. A small, unmarked Skarn-built vessel descended quietly onto a remote section of Voss's property, avoiding local sensor networks through careful timing and outdated but effective stealth technology. 8 heavily armed operatives, former Skarn military specialists working entirely outside official Dominion command, moved swiftly toward the farmhouse under cover of darkness. Their mission, according to communications later recovered by Concord investigators, was simple and brutal. Eliminate the Vorath, eliminate any witnesses, and quietly disappear before galactic authorities could respond. Samuel Voss was 76 years old that night. His hands shook slightly with age. His hearing was not what it once was. He was, by every reasonable measure, no longer the soldier he had been 30 years earlier. But Junebug had not aged the same way. Vorath, according to updated Concord biological studies conducted after these events, live significantly longer than most comparable predator species, often reaching full maturity around the same age Junebug had reached during the final years of the war, then remaining in that powerful prime state for many decades afterward. The attackers clearly expected an easy, quiet operation. They did not expect what actually happened. Dr. Vek, still awake reviewing his research notes in a guest room near the farmhouse, later provided the only detailed outside account of that night's events, corroborated afterward by security footage recovered from Voss's small property. The first indication of trouble came not from any alarm, but from Junebug herself, who rose suddenly from her resting place beside Voss's chair, every massive muscle in her body tensing at once, her attention fixed unerringly on the tree line beyond the farmhouse. Voss, despite his age, reacted immediately, decades of hard-earned instinct overriding the slower reflexes of an old man's body. He moved Vec and the few other people present toward the reinforced storm shelter beneath the house, while Junebug positioned herself directly between the approaching threat and the people she had protected for 30 years. What followed, according to Vec's later testimony, lasted less than 4 minutes. The attacking operatives, well-armed and well-trained, were entirely unprepared for the reality of facing fully grown, highly motivated Vorath defending something she clearly considered irreplaceable. Junebug moved with a precision and controlled ferocity that matched, and in some ways exceeded, the terrifying Old War records Vec had studied before ever arriving on Haven's edge. But even now, even in the middle of violent combat, witnesses noted something remarkable. Junebug's attacks, while devastating, remained entirely focused on active combatants directly threatening her territory. She showed no interest in unnecessary destruction. She caused no harm whatsoever to the farmhouse itself, or to any of the frightened bystanders sheltering nearby. 3 attackers were incapacitated within the first minute. The remaining operatives, realizing far too late the scale of the mistake they had made, attempted a hasty retreat toward their vessel. It was during this chaotic retreat that Samuel Voss, against every reasonable instinct of self-preservation, emerged from the shelter himself, moving toward the fighting rather than away from it. Later, when Vec asked him why, Voss gave a simple, quiet answer. "She spent 30 years standing between me and every kind of danger this galaxy could throw at us," Voss said. "I wasn't about to hide in a hole while she faced this one alone." His presence, unarmed and clearly threatening, seemed to have an unexpected calming effect on Junebug during the final tense moments of the confrontation, allowing the remaining attackers to retreat rather than face further, potentially lethal resistance. By the time local authorities and a small Concord security team arrived, alerted by an emergency signal Dr. Vec had managed to transmit during the chaos, the attackers had already fled off-world, leaving behind considerable evidence of their identity and intentions. The full story, including recovered security footage and Dr. Vec's detailed first-hand account, was released publicly across galactic networks within days. Public reaction shifted dramatically and quickly. The narrative the galaxy had believed for decades, that the Vorath were simply mindless instruments of destruction, collapsed almost overnight under the weight of clear, undeniable evidence. Here was a creature that had every reasonable capability to cause mass devastation, who instead had spent 30 consecutive years choosing peace, choosing restraint, choosing loyalty over violence at every possible opportunity, and who had only unleashed her full terrifying capability in direct, focused defense of the people she loved. Sources within the Galactic Concord confirmed shortly afterward that renewed investigations into the original Skarn weapons program had uncovered disturbing evidence supporting exactly what Voss had suspected from the very beginning. Decades earlier, kneeling beside a frightened, injured young creature in the ashes of a destroyed research facility, the Vorath had never been naturally violent monsters. They had been made that way, deliberately, through cruelty and fear. And one tired, ordinary soldier, refusing a direct order because of a simple, human instinct toward mercy, had accidentally proven it. Here is the detail that changes everything. Months after the attack, Concord researchers granted rare permission to study Junebug directly under Voss's careful supervision, discovered something nobody expected. Junebug was not simply an unusual exception among her species. She was, according to updated Concord biological reports, entirely typical of how young Voreth naturally behave when raised without deliberate cruelty, isolation, or conditioned fear. Every terrifying trait the galaxy had feared for decades turned out to be a manufactured trauma response, not a natural instinct. In simple terms, the most feared creature in the galaxy was never born a monster. She was made afraid, and fear had been mistaken for savagery. This single realization, quietly confirmed by careful science, connects directly back to that quiet hill where our story began. Junebug sleeps peacefully at Samuel Voss's feet, not because she has been controlled, tamed, or weaponized in any way, but because 30 years ago, one tired soldier offered her something nobody else in her entire short, painful life had ever offered: patience, safety, and genuine kindness, freely given, with nothing expected in return. Reports now suggest that several other rescued young Voreth, discovered in recent months across recovering former Skarn territories, are showing remarkably similar peaceful development under careful, compassionate care, raising new questions and new hope about what might still be possible for a species the galaxy once considered beyond saving. If this opened your eyes to something you never expected, you are not alone. The next chapter of this story, following those newly rescued Voreth and the dedicated people now working quietly to help them heal, may be even more remarkable than the one you just witnessed. Let's bring this back home. One tired soldier chose mercy over orders, and that single choice quietly ended a war. One frightened, injured creature was given patience instead of cruelty, and she chose loyalty for the rest of her life because of it. And an entire galaxy, for 30 long years, misunderstood real strength as violence, when the truth was standing quietly in front of them all along. Real strength looks like patience, like trust, like one person's quiet decision to do the right thing when nobody was watching. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now, because we bring you incredible true-to-life Sci-Fi stories like this one every single week. Stories about courage, humanity, and the kind of quiet heroism history almost forgets. Drop a like if Samuel Voss earned your respect today, and leave a comment telling us exactly what you would have done, standing in his boots 30 years ago in that burned forest. Would you have followed the order? Or would you have made the same impossible choice he made? If you want to go even deeper into stories like this one, check out our full HFY story library linked below, and consider joining our free newsletter for early access to new stories before they go live anywhere else. We'll see you in the next story.